Okay, all good. Go for it, Jacques.
Hi, okay. Jacques will begin.
Yes, he'll introduce you with a poem. And yeah, Jacques, you're muted. Jacques, you're still muted.
Leave.
There you are.
Okay. Ready to begin?
Yes, all
Okay.
good.
So it's wonderful to be back on Zoom. I nearly forgot how to get onto Zoom. It's been such a long time since we've been together like this. And it's wonderful to welcome you, Frank, as the first Zoom poet of 2025. Frank has worked in social development for many years. His poems have been much anthologized. He's published at least 5 collections of poems by my reckoning, titles like Lockdown Poems, Unfettered Days, My Rainbow. And recently, Botsotso published a collection called A Place Tonight, which is about home and belonging and homelessness. So we look forward very much to hearing some of those poems and the story surrounding them. So I thought I'd introduce you with a poem by Derek Walcott. This is one of my favorites called The Season of Phantasmal Peace. I'm sure you know it. Then all the nations of birds lifted together the huge net of the shadows of this earth in multitudinous dialects, twittering tongues, stitching and crossing it. They lifted up the shadows of long pines down trackless slopes, the shadows of glass-faced towers down evening streets, the shadow of a frail plant on a city sill, the net rising soundless as night, the birds' cries soundless, until there was no longer dusk, or season, decline, or weather, only this passage of phantasmal light, that not the narrowest shadow dared to sever, and men could not see, looking up, what the wild geese drew, what the ospreys trailed behind them in silvery ropes that flashed in the icy sunlight. They could not hear battalions of starlings waging peaceful cries, bearing the net higher, covering this world like the vines of an orchard, or a mother drawing the trembling gauze over the trembling eyes of a child, fluttering to sleep. It was the light that you will see at evening on the side of a hill in yellow October, and no one hearing knew what change had brought into the raven's cawing, the killdeer's screech, the ember-circling trowel. Such an immense, soundless, and high concern for the fields and cities where the birds belong. Except it was their seasonal passing, love, made seasonless, or from the high privilege of their birth, something brighter than pity for the wingless ones below them, who shared dark holes in windows and in houses. And higher they lifted the net with soundless voices, above all change, betrayals of falling suns. And this season lasted one moment, like the pause between dusk and darkness, between fury and peace. But for such as our earth is now, it lasted long. There is something very strange happened to my prayer reader in the middle of reading that poem, but it is very beautiful. And with that, I'm going to mute myself. Please give a hand to Frank Meintjies.
Thank you. Thanks, Jacques, for that great introduction. And thanks, Ed, for all the coordinating you've been doing. I'm going to begin with a poem that was originally entitled Where is Home, but then I changed the title. But in the thesis that I was part of, it still got that old name. So the title of this poem is New Spaces, Folds and Snarls. The windows, walls, curtains that scab along the skin, that shadow stab, that shadow slash along the wall. The hymn book, the Reader's Digest, the small brown case that crests the wardrobe's top, all swirl in the ether of this head. My new spaces consider me. They observe me as I watch my adopted cat slinking closer when fish smells swirl, when the stray dog barks. Beady eye of the day, drowsy eye of the night, Happy Valley, Bridgetown, Yeovil, Klipspruit West. Now bright, airy, less cluttered than the cramped crannies of my youth. Me somewhat unbelonging, the unopened and yet unburied cardboard cartons with Kodak negatives, newspaper clippings, letters in a spare room. Me enfolded all too tightly in abiding and unabiding truths. Where is home? So that's talks about the amount of movement I've done over time and the places one lands in and the ways in which it's different, but also it then becomes home. And the cat there is one of those that, one of the things that's part of contributing to that sense of integrating. The next poem is called Rietvlei. Rietvlei is actually the place where I was born. It's somewhere in the Mzimkhulu district. Rietvlei, open sky, maize stalks, grasslands, the blades brushed and leaning, running feet that thread between rondavels on clods through grazing grass, hens, cockerels, bantams, steadily busy, cluck at grain and kernels. My HB pencils fall into the long drop, a poor start for a would-be wordsmith. In the distance, near the road, off-white walls, green water tank. The district hospital where mother labored and I crowd. Hills, vistas, whistling wind, a billowing sky in these taut hills. So as you drive past Mzimkhulu, you look towards your right along that road and you'll see the hospital that I'm talking about. still amazes me how we would have gotten to the hospital if my birth was in the middle of the night. I just want to bring a bit more light closer, so I can actually see this the text a lot better. The next one I'll read is called Walk. It's just 2 stanzas of 3 lines each, and the heading leads into each of the stanzas. The heading is Walk, ... but I'll repeat that heading. Walk into the body, out of the body, into the shroud that is the tree and its soft green leaves and rough brown umbra. Back into the bougainvillea bush, that's my spirit, cherry bright and lit by sun. So I'll repeat that one. Walk into the body, out of the body, into the shroud that is the tree and its soft green leaves and rough brown umbra. Walk back into the bougainvillea bush, that's my spirit, cherry bright and lit by sun. So with these poems, the link is made with Bessie Head's work around belonging. And what's interesting about that work is that it does raise questions about actually the belonging that's the past, that's one's original place, but actually where at the same time that original place is no longer receptive, it's not an option anymore, it's not even something that one longs back for. It also raises the issue of putting down roots in a new place, beginning to integrate, find a life there. And this raises the question raised by a number of writers, including writers such as Bell Hooks, about being in the margins. So once you're in the margins, for the artist, for the creative person, that becomes a generative space. It is from being in the margins, in fact, that one gains a particular perspective and a particular voice. And that is the voice then that then energizes the work. So the next poem is called Cambodia. So in this text called A Place to Night In, a number of the poems are just named by particular places, particular towns, particular cities. This one is called Cambodia. And it's based on an actual visit there. Cambodia. In Heo Lao, the prison, light shines through the death, through the eyes of shackles, stories tie-dyed in the color of flags, stories moored by flagpoles like stakes, prison built by the French, run by administrators imbibing coffee, superior coffee, and eating croissants. Dons at creating and raising the stakes, experts in expertise and battering rams against our spirit world. Iron shackles anchored to bed frames, no sleepwalking to shores of freedom. In the center of a room, a guillotine. The next day I meet Wood. He is steeped in memory work. He wants to know, when will words like never again truly mean never? He reveres Mandela. We doff our hats proverbially, but he wonders, how are we really doing? Are South Africans really conversing? We rabbit on how the story goes from prison to museums. Can trauma bridge us to democracy? In 1975, this Phnom Penh was a ghostly town. Someone like Wood would be taken to the fields to work. Now the town, new coin bright, now straggly and grit-lined. It's filled with youth, beeping tuk-tuks, tourists. I slide a beaded flag, stamp size and pinnable, across the table. We rise, exchange wan smiles, and hug. The next poem I'll read is set in, I want to see whether I want to do the one set in Grey Street or whether I want to do the one called Athlone in Cape Town. So I'll do the one called Athlone. Athlone. At Athlone by the Rhine of Tewtown, along the hem of Bonteheuwel, along the Bridgetown artery that is Blossom Street, near the butcher, beyond the drop-in, close to the Kismet, across from the chemist, just this side of Osmond's spice shop. There, that's where they mostly shot the children, the soldiers hidden in boxes on a government truck, the pavement where the blood tapped out. Over the bridge, the crossover from Sabran Park, our place, this side of the railway line that cuts its way to Wynberg. Here where buses throb, children taunt and aunties scold. On side streets with stray blackburns, the devil's breath, a twirling gust. Honor dry die devil rond. So I did stay in Athlone and also in places, subsections there, like the area called Bridgetown. I'm going to read these three particular poems which follow, and I'll explain what these poems are. So these three form a little set in the presentation. This one is called Fields, and it's basically alluding to, I suppose, a connection that I'm making in my life currently to nature. Fields. In fields of flowers do I put my trust. Azaleas, cattails, fringe cups, bakabiki. The government first gave me books, vaccination, and some welfare clothes. Then ate into me like ticks, bilharzia, tiny thorns. Then proliferated neurosis in me like lichen on rocks. They shrunk my growing up yard to dryness. And now on steady nights, Dad comes through the cranial mist. Daddy, the very one who said we shouldn't fight the system. In the white overalls that you used to paint houses of the folk who lived out Scottsville way. Next to you, the dog you once had, Jack, sleek brown and happy-tailed. Yes, I go forward. In fields with color washes and ranking wetlands overseen by Milky Ways, do I place my trust. I'm going to go on to the next one. This one is entitled Quadripoint, and it refers to a place where four countries meet. I'll see if I can remember them all. One is Zambia, the other is Zimbabwe, the other one may be Namibia, and it might be Botswana as well. It's an area called Chobe. And in 2018, I took 3 or 4 months off and worked in Zambia doing voluntary teaching and just became familiar with this area. Quadripoint, the tree-studded Chobe lands, tree grass, braided on a river flowing into the Zambezi. Water tumbles meters down to the water god Nyami Nyami. The plunge, a little dead, and with its crash, a kickstart, a violent rebooting of the mighty flow. Chobe, the lions proudly languid, the elephants measured and sturdy in their gait, the buffaloes quick to anger, the deer edgy, the birds, the red, green, yellow. Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Namibia, touching, ribs, the skin of their backs, knuckles. I gaze each way with one plain look. With my nose I feel the winds. Life in an acreage, an eye of calm. Sangoma, Baba Mandaza, once told my friend, release an egg and a piece of watermelon into the waters. Removing my Ica sandals, we stepped into the waters and feeling that tug, icy cold, releasing the offerings. The waters clasped the egg. The watermelon chunk got stuck in the throat, then gurgled down, a greenness and redness carried by the flow. So Baba Mandaza is a person that is based in Zimbabwe, and he often works with some people who are based in South Africa at the coast, and sometimes also work in Zimbabwe. We do the interspecies communication, so they do a kind of a training course which is focused on animal communication, led by a person called Anna Breitenbach. That's Baba Mandaza. This poem is called Hot Iron, and I know that the late Eddie Webster was looking into this, or had looked into this, and it refers to that circular pot, the round three-legged pot made of iron, which people use for potjiekos. And some of these details, I know Eddie Webster had also been working on digging up. And it was interesting to me that you think that some things, like you think beads originate in Africa, but actually they don't. You think, well, this kind of pot, is produced or was produced or originated in Africa, but actually you'll find that in the poem the mention of its linkage to the UK. Hot iron, the three-legged pot, time traveled from earlier epochs. Our rest-stop mud dwelling and that house in Rietvlei, 2020s, Potjieko status. You stand 3D, triangle sturdy over smoky coals, with Duncan Falkirk written in worms of swelling metal. You outlived the war, the big war, with gunboats, submarines, and fighter pilots. You survived the commandeering of the factories, despite uneven ground and far from coughing kitchens under thatch roofs. We occasionally gather in suburbs around a solid piece of iron. So those three poems, the interesting part about them is they are the leftover poems, or the remaining poems which actually didn't get into A Place to 19 because of the curating and the selecting process. These poems were moderated, obviously, by the examiners as well as the publisher. So they've been through that, and it's interesting the ways in which sometimes leftover poems can be the seeds of new work, This idea is captured by the Center for the Less Good Idea, which talks about the ways in which artists can actually work with the less good idea, the idea that, in fact, they put aside and didn't work with immediately. So William Kentridge pioneers this idea, and that sometimes those can become the seeds for new work. Obviously, if I had included them, I might have had to do a little more of sort of buffing, of chiseling, of shaping of those poems. But those three poems, the one is called Quadrupoint, the other was called Hot Iron, and I think the first one was called Fields. So this reminds me also of the continuities and discontinuities in one's own work. So if I think about my older work and, how would it compare comparatively to the quality of, current work? So there would be some discontinuity because obviously one grows and becomes much more refined, much more informed, and also one is gathering a lot more influences along the way. But when one does look back at one's past work, the question arises is whether that work is strong, whether you're still proud of that work, and whether that work has and carries meaning. I started writing from my 18-year-old, and when I was 20, began writing a little more at university. And the influences happened in this manner. I know, Jacques, you always ask, what are the influences? So in our school, we had an amazing English teacher, and so we were really trained in the classics, Shakespeare's sonnets, but also poems of T.H. Lawrence, works of Keats, and so on. So that was a strong influence. Then I went on to university, and there I was exposed to the poetry of people like Adam Small, Hein Willemse, but also the poetry of people like Brayton Breitenbach, and also from the Black consciousness side, poets like Ilva McKay, and so on. Thereafter, I then began to explore a lot more the poets of American, of US origin, and so really got into looking at the poetry of poets like Alice Walker, and also other writing, which wasn't poetry, but prose, like writers such as Bell Hooks and also Baldwin. So those were some of the writers, and also obviously the works of writers like Maya Angelou. So you can see how there's a wide build-up. Along the way, I also was exposed to poets from, I'll just use the word the East, but from places like Russia. So, for example, the poetry of like Yevtushenko and poets like Bertolt Brecht. And so all these influences are there. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a poem which I wrote when I was probably 22 years of age. It was about 1985, I think, and I went to Etlo, and I got a group of young people together, and we sort of did a performance with sketches, and the sketches had a bit of narrative, but in between it had poems which were performed. And this poem is called Unemployment, which comes from that time, and it's in a book called Ear to the Ground. And it's a very simple poem, but as I say, you can, if you read with an open mind, you actually are able to find that in work, there is something there that can be gained, that can be energizing, that can be illuminating. And in the scholarly work I did around literature, around and I worked at STIAS over about a 2-year period on that. And what emerges in the text is our own understanding that sometimes in working with the arts, you can actually have an arts which is focused on quality and which has, I suppose, a smaller number of people participating. And then you have another form of the arts, which is actually represented a lot by the art centers that we had in the 80s, and which I guess the Department of Arts feels they still need now, is an arts for wider participation. So we in that book, we talk of art that is high on participation and low on quality, and art versus art that is high on quality and lower on participation. So when you go to a community theater, you will find, or just a community arts center, you'll find many people engaging in art of different forms, including fine art. but they are participating for a different reason. And then you have the other form of art, which we talked about, art that is high on quality. So this poem is called Unemployment. Unemployment. Here I sit with my back against the tea room wall. The hours shuffle past. It's been months now. Try at Rex True Form. Try at Dorman Long, my girlfriend says. But everywhere, the sorries, the no vacancies. Sorry, my girlfriend says, and forks out a couple of silvers for scapes and perhaps a Zor. Yeah, with my back against the cafe wall and my pride buried, and I think, and I hear my teacher's voice. Education is the key. The Dakar mocks and asks, but where's the door? So, in a way, a very simple poem. But the other day I was just milling around and stalking away on the internet, and I found that somebody had included this poem in a workbook that they had on the subject of unemployment, and they were asking the learners, what does this repetition say? Why does the author use repetition? How do they feel? Why do they use the word sorry twice? In one sense and in another sense. Why do they talk about the victims of the begging it's not in this version, but why do in the version they use that the people walk past in Skinner and say, isn't that Auntie Molly's son, the victims of my begging? Why do they call him a victim, and who is the real victim? So I was pleasantly surprised that they had found a use for that particular poem. Let me go on to a couple other poems out of the text. I'll do 3 others. So this poem that I'll do is called Maze. So some of the poems are quite autobiographical, as you'll see from the last poem, and probably you could get from the first poem, but some don't work in that simple way. Maze. The poem initiates you into my arid spaces and into my dew-like blossom bleeding, rose-red tint at the edges of my smile. Are you dogged enough? Do you have the endurance to perambulate along the etched and sometimes recessed lines to a kind of burning center, via lines that snake and ladder, twirl and gather, along cracked and tarnished truths? Lighting glints and spectres through the haze. The next one I'll do is called Untitled. Untitled 2, an electric guitar, floating and settling back, tickles the ribcage, meanders in the echo chamber, through the planes, the sheaves, the underlays, and ectoplasm of this heart. And then the last one that I'll do is a longer poem, and it's just called Tree of Life. So this poem, Tree of Life, refers to if you are investigating your origins and you're constructing a family tree, so that brings in that idea of the tree. Somehow I got to the title, Tree of Life. 1. My names are Frank and Andrew. I'm 8 siblings wide. My mother nursed those enfeebled by age, then dusted desks at the local university. I'm still tied to the seam of her outer skirts, Kokstad, Amzumkulu, Clydesdale, Ridgely. I sang in the choir, my breath sucking balance, pulsing and waves from cacophony. Where's that inner tune that holds the world? 2. I walked along the rail line, sleeper by sleeper, to early school, used my bus fare to buy small pink cakes, trod valleys. My father's father never drove a car. These days I pilgrimage to copies and easing through street-side markets from here to East Asia and back, weave broken threads with vendors. In Maritzburg, the church teetered on a steep hill, glass cross turned inward, turned toward the city center. At Market Square, statued eyes stare back, the stone-hard gaze of Pietermaritzburg and Pietermaritzburg. 3. I once worshipped truth at altars of sound, near the footlights of Tabani, Rashid Lani, and Thandi Klaasen, intent ears as they played their souls, heartbeats throbbing through the drums. I've stalked the theatres, was stirred and shaken before proscenium arches, bare stages, drafty halls, named after councillors. More than once I waited front of house for handshakes with Ramalawu, Kani, Machikiza. When you touch my hems and pleats, touch my palms, you'll find the dust. With keen eyes, beyond this, in flips and valves, the salt and mirror shards from long ago. 4. Like a forest plant, I thrive on quiet. My pen is a prayer crawling across the page. I've walked so many walks and still walking that distance from the soul to the stars, between star and heart lie houses and dusty roads with lampposts, shamrocks, and teachers' canes, and liberating parameters of high grasses, fynbos, bush willow, acacia on either side. 5. Sit down again with me on benches, chairs, crates, sagging sofas in Woodlands, Yeovil, Klipspruit West, Bridgetown, and Overport. We'll laugh out madly, talk of aches and echoes, fires in the country's belly, pluck strings lodged deep beneath our ribs, and maybe each of us nurse thoughts of pressing on, of carrying banners one last time. Who and what comes through the mist, with smoke signals rising and rising from behind some hills, with rumors of peace some distance away and rumors of siege in this place of rocky coasts, sacred inlands, desert blooms, and agnostic mountains. What seeds awaiting gestation lie within? For now, I wrap my gemstones, dried out protea, and a small wooden cross in a tear-off of a tattered flag. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Can we please have a hand for Frank? That was a beautiful reading.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. That was quite a journey. We've come to the portion of the evening where if people have questions or comments, now is the time to speak up. I'll see if I can change the view here so I can actually just see if people have questions. I have a question, but I'm going to wait just to see the rest of the room. Are there any questions for Frank? Okay, Douglas, thank you. Douglas has a question. Okay, Jacques has a question.
I was just wondering, you touched on communication with other creatures, and I've recently been quite intrigued by a gentleman who teaches people in the East End of London, who teaches people how to deal with other people's dogs, how to manage your own dog, but also the way to deal with other people's dogs, not the rules of engagement so much as the manners one should have in dealing with other dogs, and how to talk to other dogs. And he points out that we humans are so closed in our world of words that we don't always do the right thing by other animals by asking ourselves, how do they talk and what do they recognize? And his whole big thing is that if you want to talk to a dog, use your hands, use your face, use your eyes. Don't talk so much. Don't leave the words off. Use your hands and eyes and your face. So I was just curious, I thought I'd mention that. It was interesting that you touched on.
Thanks, Douglas. So, that whole area, it's amazing how cut off humans are. And there's a huge, long history about the different relationships animals had with humans and how that's changed. When I spoke to David Medali, who was my supervisor for my PhD, he did say, in explaining to me how this PhD could be done, he said that one of his students who had completed had in fact written a thesis about the time when animals were first these strange things which were predators, and then animals becoming pets, and then later on animals are now seen as much more endangered. But it's about the senses and about being aware of the senses and opening up the senses. And the thing about writing poetry and working with poetry is being aware of one's own senses and in fact, anything of the arts, and using them all. And then also on the part of the reader, the listener, or the audience, is that being aware that they want to actually engage with all their senses. And so one of the definitions we came to in our book that we completed at STIAS was this idea of what is aesthetic. So, the definition we say there's aesthetic is when you stand before that piece of art or that thing and it engages you through all your senses. It makes you pause momentarily, and then also it makes references to actually past work by other artists. So those three things were the components. So I think there's a lot to be said about work with animals. And if you read the poetry of Ted Hughes, he's written quite a great deal about that. And I've written quite a few children's stories, and they do feature, lions talking and elephants talking and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Frank. Jacques, you're up next. You just need to unmute, Jacques.
Mute. Speech on.
So what I really loved and noticed is the sense of movement in your poems, and I wonder how you prepare yourself for poems sometimes, and whether walking is an important part of that process. Because I get a sense of you moving through the world, particularly by walking. And there's there are times that there's a time when you are just recording what you see, and then there's this moment where something happens and you catch a glimpse of your own spirit in a bougainvillea bush, that kind of thing. And just something about
Yes.
Inspiration.
Thanks, Jacques, and thanks for always being such a diligent listener and of all the poets which appear here. So the thing about the earlier life is that one is a very active person. You're at school. Eventually, you wind up in your first year in university. You're in fact moving around quite a lot and very active and even involved in sport. But then in my case, you actually start to get involved in organizations and you withdraw from those things. And I even withdraw for a huge long period of probably 10 years from about the 25-year-old, 25 years into organizational life and actually get drawn away out of writing and poetry as well. And you start to actually work with words in a way that is much more linear and stuffy and rigid. And then I suppose just leaping forward, currently where I am is actually that place where there's much more space for recognizing that we are the body. The whole body is designed to move. And that the more you walk around, as opposed to, I suppose, being carted around or being sealed off in a vehicle, the more you see and take in. And so that was how I operated when I was in Zambia, when I was in Southeast Asia for 2-3 months, and then also in the Cape where I'm currently staying. So that's the energizing and where in fact one is realizing that there's something in, because I'm also yoga and a yoga teacher, you realize that there's this connectivity with the oneness, with the bigger connectivity, and that you find that the more in fact you are out there and the more you connect with it, and you tap into that regeneration. So there's that. The trick, of course, is that if you're creative while you're walking, I find that, of course, the capacity to forget ideas, things that are in gestation, things you are conceiving is quite high if you don't have a book or a notebook with you. The poem, sometimes a poem world is like similar to the dream world. When you go into it, if you wake up in the morning and you don't note down what you dreamt, a few hours from there, you'd have forgotten it completely. So needless to say, I've lost a lot of poems over time in that way. But it is it does leave you, even if you are not walking with a notebook, with a kind of a spirit, a verve, a kind of a dynamism in your senses that you are able then to use when you are sitting down to work on writing.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. Karen, you're up next. Do you have your hand up?
Karen Lizard. Hello can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello from Johannesburg, everybody, where we've just had a beautiful thunderstorm. I want to start by congratulating Frank on your PhD and this new collection. And Frank, just some observations is I really love that you've got this interplay between a groundedness in your use of language and an exquisite lyricism. So I think that intertwining of the lyrical and the grounded is very compelling. I'm also compelled by your capacity for the wide horizon and the small horizon simultaneously, the big picture and the minute picture. I find you deal with that very skillfully. Ed, may I offer Frank a poem as a thank you? It's very short.
Absolutely.
And this is also in response to Douglas, because this is not so much the smell or feel of nature as the shape. The context here is I was able-bodied until I was 39, and I then had a severe stroke. So this comes from my collection of poems, Echoes, which are filtered through my stroke. And this little tiny poem is called Stream for Frank. You're in the garden in your wheelchair with a smiling cup of tea and a book. Your book is face up on the table, breathing while you sip. A slight lumbering movement near you. Oh, look, an ancient reptilian shape on your book. Oh, look, it is the same creamy color as the pages. A chameleon has absorbed your book. Absorbed the words from your warm, alive book, your sunny, supple story. Characters carried away with plot on a cool, mysterious stream. Bring my book back warmly, please. Bring my book back warmly, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I really like that idea of the way in which the element of color was absorbed, and yeah, in one of the poems I have, it's about both about a frog and about a chameleon, and it's featured in the poem, and then somewhere along the towards the tail end of the poem, it's saying, well, what is the color of the land? And the suggestion is not only do we get a mood from the land itself, but we also give the land that mood. So color there standing for that mood. So somewhere in that poem is that idea captured there, and that poem is called Colors of the Wind. Actually, it's not in the book. It's one of the poems that remains, and it's called Colors of the Wind.
Thanks, Frank.
So thank you, Karen. That was really great to actually hear a response, yeah, because poems are often in dialogue with each other, and we are in dialogue with all the poets we read.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Karen. Alan, you're up. Hi.
Yeah, hi, sorry, thanks. Oh, there we go. Good, yeah, so I tuned in a bit late. Well, Jacques, you always send me these notices late. Ha, ha, ha. Please put me on the, email list, then I'll get it in time. I mean, I know your work pretty well, Frank, I mean, obviously as a publisher, but maybe just to point out two things. Take the discussion in a different route, because I didn't hear all the poems that you read tonight. So maybe what I'll refer to you touched on or didn't. But the one poem that always fascinated me is Portals. Did you read it?
No.
Okay, that's a pity, because it's a great poem because it's about entries into different experiences in different places that almost transcend the physical space where you are, right? Takes you into another type of zone. And there are quite a number of these portals. And the one that I just wanted to touch on quickly is into the whole at Kokstad, to emerge far beyond in understandings of Khoiness, Khoi, right, as in Khoi, the Khoi people. So I wanted to just maybe touch on, I mean, in the last 30 years, we've seen a struggle for what you can loosely call colored identity. I mean, we had 7 different classifications of colored people under apartheid. It was beyond absurd, but there it was. And I think the struggle has been since then, where obviously after 94, legally, all of that fell away. But the consequences, the legacies of this mangled history, people are struggling with it. And we see in the political sphere how it's manipulated. I won't mention names. Maybe our Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, right? A good example. So we have this wrestling with this crazy identity. which you also are exploring. How do you see this issue, and also in your poetry? Is it something that's central? Because Hein Willemse in his introduction, the first line is that this is an autobiographical collection. You're drawing on your own history and the history of your family and people around you. So I think it's quite a relevant question where you find yourself at this point in the rainbow nation, all of that stuff. And then secondly, just to highlight the cover and the title, A Place to Night In. It's a brilliant cover. I don't know if everyone's seen it, but I don't know if this does it justice. It's a night scene, and the sky is massive. There's this massive black sky punctured. Yeah, thanks, Frank. Excellent. With stars and this glowing moon, and then below it, you've got like two settlements, human settlements. The one in the foreground are like sort of almost pondoks, shacks, and in the background seem to be maybe the same encampment or more formal housing. So it's a vast scene and the small human habitation under the cosmos. So yeah, we've got the question of identity, human social identity. Then we've got the cosmic dimension of living. Yeah, I'll leave it at that, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So that does take me back to the point you were making, Karen, about the idea of the minor, the micro, and this thing of there's a largeness, a wholeness. And in one of the poems that I read, it's captured in the thing as the houses and the stars that, I'm just becoming aware of now. I didn't really think of it that way when writing. So yeah, thanks, Alan. And so, it does bring me to this discussion I often have with the younger people who are part of the Fees Must Fall, and who have raised many, many powerful things with us. But one of the debates I have with some of them is about the fact of where the identity politics becomes it's just stuck at that limit, at the micro, at the part that's sectioning you off. And I understand why that happens, because it generates solidarity and it generates strength. It's a very defensive thing. But what I do ask them to actually consider is, how do you hold that in balance with this idea, which was articulated very well by Nelson Mandela, which is that actually there's a shared humanity to which we all belong and subscribe. And we had to emphasize that after the last World War, where we said, in fact, if in fact one person or 100 people are actually categorized in such a way that they are seen as having no rights, no dignity, it will affect us all. So we are all connected, and we have to attribute that to others as well. Martin Luther King had the same idea. This idea goes back to this idea, no man being an island, no person an island, part of the whole. And so the thing about these struggles, so the struggles of the original people had been marginalized. Even now, this whole idea about the land and how to actually do a redistribution or restitution of the land says that we will only deal with land claims that come at a particular point in history, which actually excludes the dispossession that happened a long, long time before. And so the Khoi and the San there's a lot of history, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot there about erasure as well. And so some of the things you were talking about, Douglas, when you talked about the animals in the poems that relate to the Khoi in this, I often am talking about drums, I'm talking about animals, I'm talking about animals that sometimes comes as totems. out in nature or even out of the sea. In one of the poems, it refers to an otter that appears at Cape Point in that entire poem, which is about coyness. So the thing about, if we can recognize, whether you're in the US or in any other place where in Canada, the First Nation people, or in Australia or in South Africa, if you can properly recognize and restore to the status of Indigenous people in any of these places, we restore to ourselves, because we all emanate from that one point, that same point of origin. And that's the thing about the center of origins, is one is not saying, well, like Trevor Noah sometimes jokes that actually all the land should just be given to the colored community. But what we are saying is in fact that what we're wanting returned or restored is something that needs to be restored to all of us, because it's all our legacy, it's all our tradition. It's something that will enrich us all. And so I work with that, and one works with those things, and one sees the ways in which that marginalization continues. I'm now connected in my work currently, a little bit of work with the fisher communities, and one sees the increasing poverty, the ways in which these big fishing companies have actually colonized and taken over and dominate all the rights to the ocean, how in fact access to food sources in the sea have moved away from nearer to the coast, and the situation of poverty, exclusion, deprivation in the fishing communities is getting worse by the day. So a lot of these things are there, and we all need to work together to actually address them urgently. And so some of these things I do pick up. And it's interesting that if you do work with the things of the koi and the sand, you not only work, I suppose, towards rights and towards laws, but you also are working towards what Indigenous people are leading you towards, which is something greater, something related to the cosmos, something much bigger. And so you're facing in those directions all the time. And you're working with spirit in that sense. Thanks for that question, Alan.
Thanks, Frank. Great questions, great answers. Douglas, you're up.
I just wanted to affirm what Frank said about restitution is restitution to all of ourselves, and emphasize the point that of the Khoi people lived in amongst animals in a way that we don't. They didn't valorize human value above nature. They saw themselves as a part of nature. And that's a sort of wisdom that we seem to have lost. The other thing I thought I'd mention that's interesting is there was an academic at UWC in the mid-80s whose genetic studies, he threw an absolute hand grenade into apartheid by pointing out that his genetic studies indicated that actually the Afrikaans community in general had a lot of genetic intermixing. And the absurdity of apartheid is really ons is almal bond. We're all mixed. I have mixed roots in my family. I have Cape Dutch ancestors. And go back 4,000 years, we all come from the same origins. We're not separate humans. We all come from the same root. So the whole notion of differences are ephemeral. The deep root of humanness is that we're one people.
And the arts, if I may just respond there, Jacques and Ed, the arts is that mechanism, that means actually that, it has all its disciplines, and it has the arts and culture that's emerged from different countries. But somewhere there is that, there is the way in which there's an interconnectivity. And, like people talk about the fungus, the mushrooms, the way in which there's a connection under the earth, and the ways in which the trees connect through their roots with each other. There is this connectivity that is there through the arts, and it works at a level that actually goes beyond the disciplines that we often impose on it. So I know you want to break now. We probably need to break, but I was wondering if there was a particular poem. I know you said, Alan, that I should actually make some reference to one of those poems that refer to the koi and the sand. So I'll read something called Bits of Salt, if I may, just to close off. Is that okay, Ed?
Mute. Currently on mute.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, Bits of Salt. I am koi. I am bits of salt. I am the rock algae abiding. I am words planted in crevices, and I am thoughts born pollen-like in winds of time. With Zakes I go to rock shelters of the Pasarwa, visiting cousins, where ancestral spirits bring a calm and turmoil, a turmoil and calm. Then southward bend past Kubus on a long track to Kango Caves, and I seek the stories, the memories of the animals, the inner shame and the inner dance. I watch as the wind dances, as a shrub crawls and stalks, as a twig slithers towards my touching hand. And like the pajama-clad giraffe, the tree tilts its neck with a rugged resonance. The soul is an open sky. The soul is the soul is an open felt. The soul is a sky. I speak to elders. They listen, nod, drawing sand. Take small sips from the cup of words. We speak in tongues. Our shadows lean. We talk in shapes, drawings, and signs of truth. On the stoop of the Greek word church, where the choir in white wades in the undulations of sound, I talk to my aunts. First Aunt Dudu, then Aunt Lali, who used a plain textbook and a ballpoint pen in her search for the root, the source, the anchor. So near to the land of the Basotho, in Griqualand East stands the huge church bell lugged from overseas. What trickles through veins is thicker than Namakwa brackish water, the holy water that sluices between my bones through this flesh. In Cape Town, I walk past old conquerors cast in stone. On beach sand at Cape Point, I sit in silence, wearing an old shawl my mother once wore. An otter appears, and I think of David Stearman, the lion of Gamtoos. I feel sorrow and happiness mingle like waves before me. In this moment, I am calm and in tune. From here, unsettled feelings will grow and go where I go. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to hear that. Karen, you had your hand up.
You're muted.
I wanted to add something else on restitution by offering a poem, if I may. Sorry. This one's called Gaze, G-A-Z-E, about not the male gaze, because I don't believe that is ever singular, a male gaze. You don't look like you've had 2 children, he says, running his eyes over your breasts and pelvis. You know this is meant as a compliment. Why then does it feel like a theft? Theft. You would not trade your scars, your softer hips, your rosy babies for all the flattery in the world. Trade. But then a stroke. You see him again, but only you see, only you. He does not run his eyes over your breasts and pelvis. A woman impaired is a woman invisible. A woman impaired is a woman invisible. So just inserting some visibility of a different kind. And Frank, I've always been struck in your writing and your activism. What a big embrace you have. How inclusive you are of every different kind of human. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I know we're closing, but just to say the most difficult thing for someone who's interested in words and poetry and the arts is in fact the burden of the political, of contribution, of taking a stand. So the difficulty arises in the sense that you have to work much harder, in fact, to ensure that, in terms of the arts, you are working in that terrain, you're using what its powers are, you are actually enlivened all the time by the aesthetic, and it takes a great deal of work. So it's much more difficult, but I'd rather work with that battle. Sometimes you win some, sometimes you are more direct, you lose some, but it's a constant struggle. And fortunately, throughout the world, both with writers in Africa, but also in South America, we've had ones which have showed us the way. So thank you also for the ways in which you are carrying across some of those normative issues you want to raise through use of the arts.
Thanks, Frank. Bravo, Frank.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for your contributions to the space and your questions. We are looking at almost 10:02 now, so I'll hold off on my question. I just wanted to say thank your poem for fascinating intersections of place and memory and history, and I'll definitely look out for the book. I love the questing in the poems. There are a lot of questions in the poems, a lot of searching. Maybe that links to Jacques' question about the walking. But thank you again. Can we have a round of applause for Frank? Thank you.
So the book is available. Do buy it. They always say rhyme does not pay. Look out for it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. Okay, Alan, go for it, Alan.
Yeah, sorry, just to say that the book's obtainable either directly from Frank or from Botsotso. Also, you can, I think, find it at Clark's. Right, Frank? You dropped off some copies there.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, and I think the book lounge. So it's pretty much available.
Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Okay, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Time for everyone to get a drink or just find a poem to read. We share poems in our open mic by other writers, our own poems. You're free to do either of those things, and hope to see some of you. I know it's late. Thank you.
Bye.